Stay tuned for Butler on Business, coming up next on the Liberty Express.
Welcome back to Butler on Business. On the phone with us now is Daniel Hannan. He is the author of the very well-written book, which I have on my iPad, The New Road to Serfdom, A Letter of Warning to America. This fellow was elected to the European Parliament in 1999 at the tender young age of 27. He is my favorite statesman since Margaret Thatcher over there. Daniel, it is an honor to have you on the show, sir.
I think you have said everything that possibly needs saying. I think I should quit while I'm ahead, and we should call it a day there.
Well, I've enjoyed all of your TV appearances. If I've missed them, I YouTube them. I've read the book. I really love your perspective. It is an honor to have you on with us, sir.
Well, thank you very much, and it's a huge pleasure to be back in Atlanta, which is bigger every time I come here. Obviously, a lot of people like living here.
Well, Daniel, one thing that certainly needs to be said more is this warning that you issue in your book, The New Road to Serfdom, and it's that America must not allow our nation to be taken down this road of European-style social democracy. Can you elaborate on that theme?
I am at the end of that road now. I am inhabiting your future. It's like, think of me as that guy in H.G. Wells' Time Machine who comes back and says, don't do it. There's still time not to go there. The policies being pursued by this administration right across the whole field of government activity, on healthcare, on welfare, on daycare, on college education, on disarmament, on green taxes. These are not a random set of initiatives that just happen to be being pursued by the same administration. They are a comprehensive program of Europeanization, and they will end up turning this country into something more like what the European Union is now. And, I'm telling you, my friends, I'm there, and you're not going to like it.
Daniel, are you going to run for prime minister?
No, I'm not. And the reason I'm not is because I would be very bad being in the executive. I'm much happier in a sort of opposition role.
If you would run for prime minister, I might go over there, become a British subject, and vote for you.
Well, I'm all in favor of people coming to Britain. I think it's a great country. But we've got plenty of good people wanting to do that job.
The one thing I was proud yesterday is that you folks said you're not going to participate in bailing out the bondholders.
Well, not directly. We are indirectly participating in it through the IMF and through various European funds, as indeed you are through the IMF. I mean, the IMF is having to double its reserve fund for these bailouts, and the United States is the single biggest contributor into that.
Yeah, I think we're at 17%.
Right. So this is directly touching on you in one sense. But, I mean, the really crazy thing that was happening is that we've had this debt crisis, and the only solution that European leaders ever come up with involves more debt. So they're giving the patient the medicine that made him ill in the first place. They're now trying to borrow this unbelievable, astronomical sum of €1 trillion. As though anyone had €1 trillion lying around. I mean, if any country had that money in their back pocket, they'd have used it over the last 3 years. There's got to come a point where you realize that you just can't keep the Ponzi scheme going anymore. This is like one of those rogue traders in a bank doubling and doubling to try and buy himself a bit more time. The only way to solve this crisis is going to be for governments to spend less. You do not help an indebted country by forcing more loans on it.
Well, one of the, central messages in The Road to Serfdom, which was written by F.A. Hayek some years ago, was essentially that government control, government intervention will inevitably lead to more and more government control, more and more government intervention, and that's also one of the themes that you tie into your book, The New Road to Serfdom.
And there's reasons why that happens, and he would be, I'm sure, horrified, even if he was feeling a little warm glow from having been proved right, if he could be transported forward to our own age and to see how far that process had gone. You are not nearly as far advanced down that road as Europe is. This is still a country with a relatively small state share of GDP. It's still a dispersed democracy where there is some value placed on the localization of power, on states' rights, on devolution, on the ability to elect people locally. So you haven't got the problems that the EU has as a result of the massive centralization of power, but you are heading in the wrong direction. The direction is all one way. Power is shifting here from the 50 states to Washington, from the elected representative to the unelected functionary or the federal czar, from the state to the government. And don't imagine that there's some kind of magical American exceptionalism that is going to prevent the bad consequences that you now see elsewhere. If you have the same level of government intervention here that Europe has, if you have that same kind of state control of things that are at the moment the responsibility of families or individuals or civic institutions, your people will become every bit as selfish and spoiled and whinging as the crowds currently demonstrating in Athens. Because, there isn't some special magical quality in the American soil or the American sky that has kept you free. What's kept you free is your institutions. That sublime vision that was encoded on paper in the old courthouse in Philadelphia. And if you move away from that vision, you're going to get the same problems that everyone else has.
Well, Daniel, from your outside perspective looking in, how can we Americans protect the American principles, the American Constitution, from the encroachment of our ruling class?
I think it's really the single biggest thing that sets the U.S. apart from other countries, particularly apart from Europe, is the emphasis on, let's call it the Jeffersonian ideal, that decisions should be taken as closely as possible to the people that they affect. The more power you centralize, the more remote government becomes, the bigger it becomes. This was the genius that Jefferson had, that he didn't need to see this to understand it. He predicted it. He said if we end up with a single centralized government, it will become corrupt, it will become wasteful. He could have been describing the European Union. What he said has come true on the other side of the Atlantic. So I would say, do not elect an alternative government which is promising to do what these guys are doing, but do it a bit better. Elect a government that aspires to do less and to push powers back downwards and outwards to the 50 states, or better yet, to local communities or individuals.
I really enjoyed the opening quote that you had at the beginning of your book. In the epigraph, you quoted Thomas Paine saying that the cause of America is in great measure the cause of all of mankind, and I think that's very applicable, especially today.
And it's especially true if you are, as he was, and as I am, British. I mean, I look at this country as a kinsman and as an ally, but also as an inheritor of a shared tradition. The liberties that make this country distinct, that set it apart, weren't just invented in the Revolution. They have roots that stretch back through the English Glorious Revolution, through our Civil War, back to the Magna Carta, back even earlier than that, to the folk right of Anglo-Saxon common law. This extraordinary idea, this amazing concept that law doesn't emanate from the government, rather that the government is subject to the law, and that law emanates from the people, and that our government ought to be our servants rather than our rulers. You and we were both inheritors of that tradition, and we've seen it in retreat in the United Kingdom, in the country where it was developed. We've seen it pushed to one side as the state bureaucracy has grown and as our sovereignty has been taken over by the European Union. And that's why it particularly saddens me when I come here to the place where it ought to be still secure, where the vessel ought to be intact, and I see you beginning to repeat our mistakes and to row back from that extraordinary patrimony.
How do we turn the tide? I mean, the country is very divided, and we're in a tug of war right now. The politicians aren't giving us any positive sign that they can grapple with these issues. What do we as individual citizens, how do we turn the tide?
Selecting candidates who understand the gravity of the financial crisis. Basically, this is what I think it's all about. Whoever wins has got to be somebody who is capable of bringing down the deficit and doing it quickly, not over the next 20 years or whatever the Republican leadership in Congress are talking about. I wish we had 20 years to play with. We haven't. The money has gone. Your treasury is empty. Your credit is exhausted. We don't have 20 years to play with. Frankly, whoever can do that ought to be the person who wins. I really couldn't care less where, in the current circumstances, a candidate stands on guns or gay marriage or anything else, as long as they can sort out the money and restore order and sanity to your public spending.
What's your feeling on central banks?
Well, if ever we needed evidence of the mistake of allowing these banks to set our economic policy, we have it now. I mean, the proximate cause of the current crisis was that your Fed and our Bank of England and Europe's European Central Bank all pursued the same policy of keeping interest rates way too low for way too long. The bubble was inflated, and what's happening now is that the air is trying to come out of the bubble, but the central banks of the world are still pumping the bellows, trying to keep it inflated again, which ensures that the crash is going to be worse when its full effects are felt. Everything we've done since the Lehman's collapse, since 2008, has served to make the final reckoning heavier. This policy of ultra-low interest rates, this policy of quantitative easing, printing more money. We're replicating the problems that caused the crash in the first place, which is that we're encouraging consumption without any commensurate increase in production. And you can't keep consuming without producing anything and bridging the gap by borrowing forever. And what we're doing when we postpone the problem, it's like a drunk trying to postpone the hangover by remaining drunk. You can carry on having more and more shots of vodka, but eventually it's going to catch up with you, and it's going to be much worse because you didn't face it at the beginning.
The segment just prior to this, when we were discussing how the 1920 Depression, the government did nothing. It was swift, it was deep, and it was quick, and we had the Roaring '20s thereafter.
Right.
And unfortunately, we are pursuing the policies that gave us a 15-year-long Great Depression.
Absolutely right. And it is important that people understand that. I'm not sure that has sunk in. A lot of people still take the view that's orthodox in school books, which is that, FDR spent his way out of recession. We now know better. The country was poised for a beautiful recovery in the early 30s, and he pursued a series of unimaginably stupid policies based around encouraging cartels, based around inflating the cost of labor. He probably prolonged the recession by another 7 years by doing that.
Daniel, excuse me, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, in the United Kingdom, we also had to deal with the great crash, and we dealt with it by, what you said had happened in the 20s. We dealt with it by bringing down the debt, by cutting government spending radically, and the figures speak for themselves. To this day, the 1930s remain the decade which saw the highest overall growth in all of British history.
Daniel, it is an honor, sir, to have you. Tell the listeners about your book and how they can get it.
Well, it's the New Road to Serfdom, A Letter of Warning to America. It's just come out in paperback. You can get it from Borders, you can get it from Amazon, and the financial crisis has come along in Europe just in time for the paperback edition as a vivid warning of what's in store for you if you carry on down this road.
Well, it is very well written, and it's a very enjoyable read. Daniel, we hope that you enjoy your time here in the States, and say hello to our friends in Texas at the Institute for Policy Innovation. We have them on the show quite often, and I think it's a good thing that what you're doing, and we in America thank you for all of your work.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Daniel. This is Alan Butler, Butler on Business. Jason and I will be back in a couple of minutes.